His name was Finn Calder, and if anyone in the village had been asked to describe him, they would have searched for words that fit exactly. Quiet was too vague. She was wrong. Finn did not avoid people out of fear, he avoided noise. Spoken words seemed blunt to him, tools that lost their edge with overuse. He preferred observing how things behaved when left undisturbed. He could sit motionless for hours, not lost in thought, not drifting, but sharply noticing the slow shift of shadows as clouds crossed the sun, the way birds favored certain branches and ignored others, and the subtle change in sound that always came before weather turned. Most people read his stillness as emptiness. It was the opposite. The gorge lay beyond the last plowed fields, where tended land surrendered to stone and rushing water. A narrow trail twisted through spruce and pine before suddenly opening onto the sheer drop, where the river threw itself downward in unrelenting fury. The waterfall was loud enough to drown thought. Most villagers only approached when they had to. To Finn, the roar was not disorder. It was a layered structure. He learned its rhythms the way others learned songs. Morning water carried a different note from evening water. Snowmelt rang sharper than rain-fed flow. Even in sleep, Finn could sense when the river rose. He always brought Ash with him. The dog had grown large and broad-chested, its coat dark as river stone after rain, its movements spare and certain. Ash did not fidget or whine. He seemed to understand that waiting was its own kind of effort. Finn trusted Ash more than any living thing. The dog caught details Finn missed, sudden twitches in the brush, unfamiliar scents on the wind, shifts in the behavior of deer or ravens. Ash was never unsettled by the waterfall. He watched it the way Finn did, as something constant, not threatening. Finn's parents had died in the same hard winter, days apart, when fever swept through faster than anyone could grasp. The village remembered that winter for its cold, not its sorrow. Finn remembered the silence that followed. He moved into his uncle Thomas Calder's house with few words exchanged. Thomas was a man of fixed habits, up early, to bed late, speech plain and rare. He never asked Finn how he felt or demanded explanations. This arrangement suited them both. Finn quickly learned how to be useful without drawing notice, chopping wood, hauling water, and mending what broke. In return, he was left in peace. After that winter, Finn stopped asking why things happened and began asking how. How cold seeped through walls. How wind slipped through cracks no eye could see. How snow piled in some places and melted in others. These questions had answers if you watched long enough. The gorge became his study. The waterfall is his patient instructor. He noticed that while the surrounding rocks stayed slick and moss-covered, there were hollows behind the falling curtain where stone remained dry. Not warm, exactly, but steady and sheltered. He tested this first with his hands, then with hours spent standing there. The first time Finn stepped behind the waterfall, it was late spring, the river swollen with meltwater, spray thick in the air. He moved carefully, feeling for solid footing. Ash followed without pause. The moment they crossed the veil of water, the sound changed, flattened, muffled, and becoming something felt in the chest more than heard in the ears. Finn pressed his back to the rock and waited. The stone was cool but did not steal warmth the way open wind did. Water thundered inches from his face yet never touched him. He stayed until his legs shook. When he stepped out again, he knew the place held possibilities. He returned the next day, and the next. In rain and in summer heat, at dawn and near dusk. He watched how direct sunlight never reached the hollow, yet light still filtered in. How winter snow slid off the overhang instead of piling. How wind lost its bite, broken and scattered by stone and motion. At night, by lamplight, Finn began sketching. He did not draw houses as the village understood them. He drew the paths water favored and the curves stone preferred. He drew spaces shaped by what moved around them. When Finn finally spoke his plan aloud, he did so without drama. It was during an evening gathering in the village hall, with men talking of repairs and winter stores. "I'm building a cabin," he said quietly. Someone asked where. Laughter followed, not cruel, simply the easy kind saved for harmless oddity. Someone wondered if he meant a fishing hut. Another joked he'd never sleep again with that roar. Finn waited until the chuckles faded. "In the rock," he added. That only deepened the amusement. No one tried to stop him. No one offered help either. Construction began in early summer. Finn hauled stone alone, choosing pieces by weight and grain, rejecting far more than he carried. He learned quickly which rocks shattered under pressure and which locked together when set at the right angle. He worked deliberately, tearing down as often as he built. Ash lay nearby, eyes on the water, shifting only when the sun moved. Villagers passed sometimes, offering polite encouragement that carried no real belief. Finn accepted it with a nod. He was not trying to prove anything. He was learning. Weeks passed before the first curve of a wall became clear. Finn anchored it where the cliff itself took the load, letting living rock bear what it was meant to bear. He angled surfaces so spray would glance away rather than strike. He left gaps where damp needed to escape. He worked with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to go. His hands cracked and bled. He bound them and kept going. Ash aged visibly that summer, his muzzle whitening, his naps stretching longer, but he never missed a day at the gorge. The first person to truly notice Finn's work was Professor Malcolm Hargrove, a retired scholar who studied natural systems the way priests studied scripture. He had come to the gorge to measure erosion patterns, and instead found a young man building with an instinct that unsettled him deeply. Hargrove observed in silence for nearly an hour before speaking. Finn answered without pause, explaining the airflow behind the falls and the way spray dispersed, as calmly as if discussing ordinary weather. Hargrove asked another question, then another. His polite smile faded entirely. When he left that day, his notebook remained blank. He needed time to think. Hargrove returned the next morning with instruments and, later, books. He did not lecture. He asked why. Finn answered plainly. Sometimes Finn said, "I don't know yet," and that reply satisfied Hargrove more than certainty ever could have. He recognized a mind that discovered rather than imposed. Together they measured temperature gradients behind the curtain of water, shifts in air pressure, and the dampening of sound. Hargrove began to see what Finn had felt instinctively. He spoke of it to no one in the village. Evidence carried more weight than opinion. By autumn the cabin existed, small, deliberate, seamless. The walls curved inward, blending into the living cliff. The roof was not added but was continuous stone, shaped and sealed to guide water away. Smoke rose through a narrow fissure that looked like a natural crack. From the riverbank, nothing appeared changed. From behind the waterfall, the structure felt like an extension of the gorge itself. Villagers predicted it would not survive winter. Finn did not debate them. He tested, prepared, sealed, redirected moisture, and stored dry firewood in pockets the spray could not reach. He built the hearth deep into the rock so the stone itself would hold and slowly release heat. Ash claimed the warmest spot beside it and refused to yield it. Hargrove warned Finn privately that storms were growing less predictable. Finn only nodded. He had sensed it in the river weeks earlier. The water no longer rested between surges. The land felt restless. Finn was ready. When the storm finally came, it arrived without warning theatrics. Pressure fell. Wind lingered. Then snow began and simply refused to stop. The village retreated indoors as timbers groaned and roofs sagged. Finn was already behind the waterfall. Outside, the roar turned savage. Inside, sound softened and spread. Stone held warmth. The fire burned steadily. When the first faint, desperate knock sounded against the hidden door, Finn opened it without hesitation. Ash stood beside him, still as carved rock. One by one, villagers arrived, soaked, trembling, alive. They stayed for days. The waterfall broke the storm's fury. The cabin endured. When the storm loosened its grip, it did not end cleanly. Wind eased first, losing its cutting edge, shifting from a scream to uneven breath. Snow still fell but drifted gently now instead of driving sideways. True silence came last, thick, unfamiliar, like a long-held breath finally released. Finn stood near the falls before dawn, motionless, with Ash at his side. He waited without impatience, listening for the single detail that mattered. The river's voice had returned to its old rhythm. That, more than the pale sky, told him the worst had passed. The village below looked rearranged rather than ruined. Rooflines bowed under uneven weight. Chimneys tilted where mortar gave way. Fences traced drunken paths through drifts that erased old boundaries. Smoke rose thin and cautious from only a few homes. Finn observed without judgment. Damage was simply information about pressure, direction, weakness, and chance. He noted it quietly, the way he always had, then turned toward movement below. Far along the buried road, a lone figure struggled through the snow. Ash's ears pricked, catching the crunch of boots before Finn could make out the person. One by one, the sheltered villagers emerged from behind the waterfall, stiff, pale, and blinking in the weak dawn. Their faces looked older, drawn by fear that had found no outlet. Words were slow to come. Gratitude existed, but language trailed behind it. Professor Hargrove lingered near the entrance, notebook still untouched in his pocket. He watched villagers glance back at the falling water, not with old dread now, but with something nearer to reverence. He understood that survival had rewritten the village's story. The only question left was what they would do with the new version. The village did not celebrate. It worked. Paths were shoveled first, then doors freed from ice, then roofs braced where they still could be saved. Finn joined wherever extra hands were needed, hauling timber, lifting fallen beams, digging channels for future melt. He spoke little. When thanked, he nodded and moved to the next task. He explained the cabin only when asked directly, and then only in terms of mechanics. Curved stone, moving water, and deflected force. People listened differently now, not because he spoke louder, but because they had felt the truth in their bones. Ash became a quiet center in those days. Villagers reached to touch his thick, graying coat as he passed. Children sat pressed against his steady warmth while parents labored. Ash accepted it all calmly, tail thumping once before he settled again. His age showed clearly now, muzzle nearly white, steps measured, rests frequent. Finn adjusted without thinking, carrying heavier loads himself, pausing more often. Time, like the river, made no bargains. Finn did not resist it. He moved with it, the way he had learned to move with water. Caleb Morris, the village's most respected builder, voiced his doubt even as he worked beside the others. He did not raise his voice or mock. He simply spoke with the calm certainty of decades spent doing things one proven way. One storm proves nothing, he said. A hidden cabin behind falling water is clever, maybe, but not practical for ordinary families. Finn listened without reaction. He had long ago learned that arguments seldom changed minds. Weather did that work far better, and weather, he knew, would come again. Hargrove watched Caleb closely, not with irritation, but with the patient interest of a scholar waiting for the next piece of evidence to arrive. Professor Hargrove invited Finn to his home one evening as winter deepened once more. It was the first time Finn had crossed that threshold. The house smelled of old paper and wood smoke, shelves bowed under the weight of books and instruments, notes layered upon notes. Hargrove brewed tea and spoke without ceremony. He told Finn the cabin was not luck, it was applied understanding. He asked if Finn would help document the methods. Finn shook his head. "I don't know all of them yet," he said quietly. Hargrove smiled. Then we start with what you do know. Not to prove you right, to make it repeatable. They worked together through long weeks. Hargrove measured and recorded, Finn demonstrated and tested. They returned to the gorge in snow and sleet, charting temperature stability behind the falls, air pressure shifts, sound diffusion, and stress lines in the stone. Finn learned formal names for principles he had always felt. Hargrove learned restraint, letting observation shape theory instead of forcing conclusions. Slowly, the cabin shifted from oddity to model. That suited Finn. A model could be shared without drama, improved without pride, and survive the next storm even if he could not open the door himself. Spring came unevenly, snow retreating from open ground yet clinging to shadowed slopes. The gorge roared higher with meltwater, sharper and louder. Finn used the thaw to strengthen weak points exposed by freeze and expansion, replacing shifted stones, widening drainage channels, and correcting flaws openly. Villagers watched more closely now. A few asked questions. Finn answered honestly, including what had failed. That plain truth earned trust more surely than bold claims ever could. Even Caleb Morris visited once, standing silently behind Finn, eyes tracing the work as though hunting for hidden luck. Summer brought a quieter pressure. People began asking Finn to examine their homes, barns, and sheds. They sought certainty. Finn could offer only principles. He walked with them, pointing out wind paths, snowdrift patterns, and angles where weight collected dangerously. He spoke softly, tying every word to visible evidence. Some listened and made changes. Others nodded politely and did nothing. Finn did not press. Fear made people rash. Habit made them stubborn. The best he could do was leave knowledge within reach and wait until someone chose to take it. The second major storm arrived earlier than expected, less violent than the first, but quicker, with little warning. This time, fewer waited too long. Families reached the Waterfall cabin sooner, carrying supplies or tools. They understood now that shelter alone was not enough. Cooperation was. Inside, the cabin held firm, the stones storing heat, the falling water shattering wind into harmless fragments. When the storm passed, no one spoke of miracles. They spoke of preparation. Caleb Morris said nothing at all, but his silence carried new weight. Afterward, the village shifted in small, lasting ways. People sealed drafts in autumn without prompting. They stacked extra firewood. They braced roofs to shed snow rather than hold it. They dug better drainage. They checked on neighbors earlier. Nothing dramatic, just different. Finn did not call meetings or give speeches. He kept working. Hargrove, however, began offering short lessons in the village hall, using Finn's observations as calm examples. He presented the Waterfall cabin not as a legend but as a practical case study. People listened because the lessons were immediate and useful. Caleb finally approached Finn directly one cold morning, not in crisis, but during ordinary labor. He offered no apology, no praise. He simply asked, "Why does the air feel less sharp behind the falling water?" Finn considered him for a long moment, then answered plainly. Moving water disrupts wind structure, breaks laminar flow into turbulence that loses force. It also raises humidity, which changes how cold touches skin. Caleb listened, brow creased, then nodded once. It was not full agreement. It was acceptance that Finn had noticed things Caleb had never needed to name. That was the beginning. That winter, Hargrove and Finn began recording building patterns across the village. Walking house to house, noting where drifts formed, roofs strained, and walls iced. They made simple sketches, arrows, angles, nothing ornate. Finn preferred direct watching to lengthy writing, but he understood Hargrove's insistence on records. Records outlasted people. His parents had gone, their knowledge had gone with them. He did not want the same for what the Waterfall had taught him. The notes grew into a binder, then a small stack, kept dry in oilcloth and stored as carefully as winter provisions. Ash's decline grew clearer with the years. He still followed Finn, but slower. He stumbled once on the gorge path and looked almost embarrassed, as if age were an error he had committed. Finn slowed without remark, carried extra water for more frequent drinks, and lit the hearth earlier on chill days so Ash could rest in warmth. The dog's eyes clouded, his hearing faded. Yet his loyalty stayed unchanged. He still placed himself between Finn and sudden motion. He still watched the world with the same patient calm. Finn did not speak of endings. Finn simply made space for endings. One morning, he found Ash lying near the cabin hearth, breathing slowly and evenly. The dog did not rise when Finn entered. Finn sat beside him, hand resting on the familiar thick fur, and waited. Ash's breathing eased further, then stopped as gently as snow settling on stone. Finn remained there a long while, not frozen in shock, not frantic with grief, simply present. Later, he carried Ash above the gorge, where afternoon sun warmed the rock. He dug carefully, hands steady. He placed no marker beyond a single flat stone. The waterfall continued its endless song. Finn stayed until dusk, listening, letting sorrow settle without resistance. Loss was not a crisis. It was a season. After Ash's death, the world behind the waterfall felt altered. The roar was unchanged, the spray the same, the stone the same, yet the space beside Finn was empty in a way that reshaped time itself. He kept his routines, walking the gorge path, checking joints and drainage, and returning to the village for ordinary repairs. People noticed the absence and spoke softly, if at all. Children stopped asking about Ash after the first week. Adults avoided the subject as though words might disturb something still healing. Finn preferred it that way. He needed no comfort wrapped in conversation. He needed continuity. In the years that followed, the cabin became less a secret refuge and more a quiet reference. When storms threatened, families knew the way, but they came less often because their own homes held stronger. Preparation had spread like a slow habit. Roof angles shifted across the village, drainage improved, and windbreaks took root. People began siting new sheds with terrain in mind, avoiding natural drift pockets. None of this was openly credited to Finn. It did not need to be. The village had simply grown more watchful, behaving, in small ways, as Finn had always behaved, observing first, acting second, speaking last. Hargrove eventually published a modest paper in a regional journal, careful, understated. He described the waterfall cabin not as a wonder, but as an example of patient observation. Finn was mentioned once, in a single unadorned sentence. That suited Finn perfectly. Recognition felt slippery, like thin ice over deep water, beautiful, but risky if leaned on too heavily. What mattered was that the ideas traveled. A teacher in a neighboring valley requested a copy, then a builder, then a farmer facing hard winters. Hargrove sent them freely, insisting the knowledge belonged to anyone who met the cold. Finn read the paper once, folded it, and set it aside. He cared more whether a neighbor's roof held next season than whether a sentence remembered his name. Caleb Morris changed gradually, in a way that felt true. He began asking questions privately, never in public where pride might corner him. He started using Finn's drift sketches when planning repairs. One autumn he built a new shed with a roof pitched to shed snow rather than trap it. Villagers noticed. Caleb shrugged it off. The next year he braced a neighbor's beam in a way he once would have dismissed, distributing the load more evenly. "Just good sense," he muttered when asked. Finn said nothing. He understood. Sometimes pride needed a quiet path, not a loud apology. What mattered was that the brace held. The waterfall cabin endured. Stone darkened with age. Joints settled into lasting balance. The hearth left honest soot on the inner rock. From the river it remained invisible. From within the hollow it felt inevitable, as though the cliff had always meant to hold shelter. Finn maintained it without sentiment, replacing what wore, correcting what shifted, and never adding decoration. It stayed exactly what it was, a stable space where nature's force broke itself against moving water and curved stone. When new families visited, he did not tell tales. He pointed out where water struck hardest, where air stayed calm, and where heat lingered longest. Then he stepped back and let them see for themselves. As Finn grew older, children began coming to the gorge not to play but to learn. Hargrove brought small groups, teaching them to read drift lines, to feel air changes on their palms, and to catch the quiet warnings a landscape offered before a storm. Finn rarely spoke in these lessons, but when he did, the children listened. He did not lecture. He asked what they noticed, let them answer wrong, and then corrected them with more looking. Hargrove called it education. Finn called it attention. The children learned the land was not a foe but a system, and systems could be read by anyone patient enough. When Hargrove's health began to fade, Finn visited more often. They spoke little. Hargrove's voice weakened, but his eyes stayed keen. One snowy evening he asked what Finn would do with the notebooks after he was gone. Finn answered at once, keep them, add to them, and share them when asked. Hargrove nodded, content. He died quietly later that winter, leaving stacks of paper that looked plain until you realized they held a careful map of survival, drawn in measurements and restraint. Finn carried the notebooks home himself, wrapped as gently as something breakable. In a way, they were. With Hargrove gone, some expected Finn to step into the role of village authority on storms and building. Finn refused it simply by never claiming it. He did not summon meetings or deliver speeches. He kept working. If asked for help, he helped. If asked for an explanation, he explained. If someone sought guaranteed certainty, he offered none, only evidence, observation, and practice. Some found this maddening, others found it steadying. Over time, the village adjusted to his way the same way it had adjusted to the waterfall itself, learning to live beside something powerful without needing to control it. The gorge kept its rhythm. The water fell. The stone held. Finn continued. By accepting that some forces could not be commanded, only understood. The notes Finn kept grew thicker, labeled plainly, roof loads, drift patterns, wind angles. He stored them high and dry, safe from fire or flood. A particularly harsh winter struck a decade after the first great storm, the kind that tested habits more than walls. It dragged on, grinding people down. Food stores mattered. Cooperation mattered. Preparedness mattered. The village did not unravel into panic as it once might have. They shared labor, checked on the elderly, and passed firewood when supplies thinned. The waterfall cabin served as a final reserve, not the only lifeline. That shift proved more than any single storm ever could. The village had truly changed. Finn watched quietly as neighbors helped one another without disaster's immediate whip. Preparation had quietly become culture. In the deepest cold, that was worth more than stone. Caleb Morris died that winter, not from exposure, but from age and a swift illness. Before the end, he asked Finn to visit. Finn went without rush. Caleb's voice was faint, but his gaze was steady. "You were right," he said, plain as reporting the sky. Finn offered no triumph, no grateful words. He simply nodded. Caleb's fingers tightened briefly on Finn's sleeve. "Don't let them forget," he whispered. Finn understood, not his own name, but the habit of attention, the quiet discipline of preparation. Caleb passed the next morning. The village buried him in hard frozen ground. The roof braces he had once dismissed stayed in place, silently holding. Over time, the waterfall cabin became less secret and more of a landmark, though it remained hidden from casual eyes. Travelers heard of it in passing talk, not as a myth but as a practical example. A farmer from a far valley came one autumn to see how stone and falling water could shelter together. Finn showed him without ceremony. Then a builder arrived. Then a teacher. Finn did not seek them out, but he never turned them away. Each left with notes, sketches, and memories. Finn watched them go with the same calm he watched storms gather. What mattered was what they built afterward. Letters came later, improved barns, safer homes, winters faced with less loss. Finn read them once and tucked them away. They were quiet proof, the kind that needed no display. Finn grew older. Hair grayed. Hands stiffened on cold mornings. Yet he remained steady. He still walked the gorge path, slower now, sometimes pausing on a stick, but always reaching the falls. He maintained the cabin, checking joints, clearing drainage, and feeding the hearth when needed. He sat longer on the flat stone above the water, listening deeper. Without Ash, the silence was wider, but it was not absence. It was a fuller presence. Young people sometimes joined him, drawn not to play but to learn. Finn did not teach with words. He taught by waiting long enough for them to notice what he noticed. That patience became his truest legacy, more lasting than any wall. One spring, a young couple planning a small home near the village edge asked Finn not how to build it grand, but where to place it so winter would not fight them endlessly. Finn walked the ground with them. He watched grass bend in the breeze, noted lingering snow in shaded hollows, and pointed to a gentle rise with natural drainage and existing windbreak trees. The couple thanked him. Finn nodded. Months later, their roof held firm through a heavy fall that damaged others. They never called it luck. They called it common sense. Finn sat by the waterfall afterward and allowed himself the faintest trace of satisfaction. Common sense, he knew, was never common until someone taught it. Patiently, quietly, without demand. In the end, nothing about Finn's life appeared dramatic from afar. He never grew famous. He never left the village. He built no monuments. He shaped one shelter where the land itself offered protection, and then helped his people learn to listen. The waterfall kept falling, indifferent and eternal, breaking wind, scattering snow, singing the same endless song. Finn still sat on the flat stone on quiet mornings, listening. The patterns remained, steady as breath. Not warnings, not promises, just truth, repeated forever for anyone patient enough to hear. The water remembers flow. And so do we. That was the complete story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next ones. We'll meet again on Hill Destiny with another tale. Take care. Glowing Star.